governments and people were deliberately stopping a lot of economic activity, we'll see declines in economic activity that just are beyond any living memory because of the disease. It's akin to a natural recession. So I really do think this is a once in a lifetime. I hope it's a once in a lifetime event, and I hope our participants don't think of it as something where we'll react to any old thing.
Absolutely. You and I have discussed many times before coming from my part of Oklahoma. The Depression in the 1930s, the Dust Bowl, dramatic effect of Fed policy, 2090 Congress policies, the administration at that time's policies that made things so dramatically worse. Three-quarters of the population of my home county went away and has never come back. It is fair to say that doing what we in Congress and what the Fed has done, what Treasury's done, unprecedented as it may be, still is dramatically cheaper than a lack of action. Fair assessment, Mr. Chairman, putting the economic train back on the tracks costs a lot more than keeping it on the tracks.
I feel very strongly that way. I really do. And we're going to come out of this, and the more we do now, the stronger our economy will be. The better we're able to keep people working, get tax revenue back up, and have a strong economy to pull us forward and service the debt. We're going to come out of this with more debt. So our banks are going to have taken losses. Households will have run down their capital. Everybody will. Nonetheless, the economy will be stronger, and that'll help everyone. Banks are going to have taken
And ultimately, Fed policy will reflect that new reality, as will fiscal policy in the United States Congress have to reflect that new reality. Piper will have to be paid ultimately. But having that bill to pay is how we get to the point of being able to pay. Piper will have to be paid ultimately.
That's right, and that's why I think this is not a time to worry too much about the longer run fiscal situation. We'll have to return to that. But I would say this isn't the time to prioritize worry too much.
One last thought, representing a substantial part of the rural area of Oklahoma, making sure that Fed programs work as well in the countryside as they do in the money centers in the big urban areas is critically important from my perspective. Making sure those facilities are available to everybody helps assure the robust recovery. We don't want to leave any particular regions or parts of society behind as we come out of this, and I believe you're working aggressively in that area.
We have tried to, and in fact, I would point to the things we've done with the municipal facility, where we made sure that states that have more rural populations and don't have a lot of big cities, nonetheless, have the benefits of that facility. And we will continue to adjust all our facilities to try to serve that. Rural populations who don't have a lot of big cities.
With that, Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Heck, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
With that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start by thanking you for setting up the phone call the other day with Chair Powell regarding the issue of commercial real estate and the future of that market and its importance. I don't have time to get into that today, and I wish I did, because we still have a problem, and I'm ringing the alarm bell again. Since I was privileged to join this committee nearly 8 years ago, I've asked at every single Humphrey Hawkins hearing, when does America get a raise? The truth of the matter is that for far too long, indeed I would suggest 40 years, we have been content, and some people have supported, frankly, running the economy short of its potential. I remember when I got here that there were people both on and off the FOMC who thought if we ever dipped below 6% unemployment, it would trigger inflation. And then it was no, not 6, but 5.5, 5, 4.5, 4. And what we know is that we ran this economy between 3.5% and 4% unemployment for 2.5 years, and we maintained. In fact, we were short of the price stability target. The fact of the matter is that during your tenure, Mr. Chair, and I tip my hat to you, sir, you've opened people's eyes about the importance of a tight labor market. You did this yesterday in the Senate, you've done it again here today, and you've done it in public utterances. And we cannot thank you enough. Well done, sir. You have pointed out, rightfully, that tight labor markets help with wage growth, but especially with employment levels and wage growth for people at the lower end of the income spectrum. Again, I want to thank you. But the fact remains, Mr. Chair, that the mission of the Fed is no different today than it was over two generations when it never allowed the economy to operate at a tight labor status. The law hasn't been changed and the rules and regulations haven't been changed. So we're going to get past this some point, and the sooner the better. But my question for you is, short of you having a lifetime appointment, which by the way I would support, sir, but short of you having that, how can we be assured that what you have so appropriately pursued will continue? And I want to preempt you a little bit, if I may, Mr. Chair, by saying every federal entity in the history of civilization has resisted opening up the underlying authorizing act for that entity. And the Fed's been no different in my conversations with them. To some degree, I get that. I mean, it's as though you're channeling Will Rogers, who said once, people feel about Congress the same way they do when baby gets a hold of the hammer. You're worried about what might happen if we opened up that act. But there is no assurance that what you have rightfully pointed out, what you have rightfully pursued, will continue to be pursued. How do we assure ourselves that what you have figured out and what you have led the Fed to do will continue into the future if we don't change the law, sir? That what you have figured out and what you have led the Fed to do will continue into the future if we don't change the law. Did I stump you, Mr. Chair?
I forgot to unmute myself. Sorry. So I actually think the law as written does accommodate what we've really learned, what a lot of us have learned. And that is that, so for many years when we were growing up, inflation really was a problem. People weren't imagining that. They really had to watch carefully or inflation would move up and it would hurt, people on fixed incomes more than anybody else. So, and what we've learned is that, these disinflationary forces we've been seeing around the world for a quarter century, that they're here to stay for a while, and that, you know, we live in an era of continued downward pressure on inflation. That gives us the ability to have very low levels of unemployment. I don't think anybody's going to unlearn that. I also don't think it's going to be, if you change the law to, the situation will change. The economy's ever evolving. And I don't know that changing the law is what we need to do. I do think we get that, and I think economists broadly do get that now. And that's why we're so eager to get back to where we were and below. We weren't seeing inflationary pressures at 3.5%. What we saw was the gains in wages going to people at the lower end of the wage spectrum for the first time in a very long time. I can't tell you how much we want to get back there and how fast we want to get there. So we'll be using our tools that way, and that's really how I look at it.
Thank you again, sir, for your leadership.
So we'll be using our tools that way. Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Stahl, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, sir, for your leadership.
So we'll be using our tools that way. Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Stahl, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, sir, for your leadership.
So we'll be using our tools that way. Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Stahl, you're recognized. Mr. Stahl, available? If not,
We can't hear you, Brian.
Mr. Stahl? Mr. Stahl, are you recognized for 5 minutes? If not,
He's talking, but we're not hearing.
Brian.
Yeah.
매도 주문이
It's
체결되었습니다.
into whatever technical difficulty there is because he's unmuted.
He's talking, but we're not hearing.
so
Yeah.
let's see, we have a little
체결되었습니다.
technical difficulty
Whatever
here.
technical difficulty there is because he's unmuted.
He's talking, but we're not hearing.
We're checking
매도
with our
주문이
staff.
체결되었습니다.
Difficulty here.
Technical difficulty there is because he's unmuted.
He's talking, but we're not hearing.
We're checking
매도
with our
주문이
staff.
체결되었습니다.
Difficulty here. Mr. Stahl, we cannot hear you. You cannot hear us, so we're going to move on while they're trying to correct that to Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, ready? You have 5 minutes. While they're trying to correct that to Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, ready? You have 5 minutes. While they're trying to correct that to Mr. Taylor. If not, we will move on to Mr. Lukemeyer. You're recognized for 5 minutes, and we'll get back to you both Mr. Style and Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for being here today. Thank you for your quick action over the last several months to set up these different facilities to be able to underpin our markets and to minimize the damage to our economy. It's amazing to see what you've done, the impact it's had, and we certainly appreciate all your efforts. Thank you very much. Um, with regards to my questions, in your most recent monetary policy report, you stated how lending standards for both households and businesses have
매도
become less
주문이
accommodating,
체결되었습니다.
and borrowing conditions are tight for low-rated households and businesses. What I think you're seeing is
매도
financial
주문이
institutions are beginning to
체결되었습니다.
look 3 or 4 months down the road and preparing for regulators and their exams to come into their institution after this period of forbearance and begin classifying loans and force banks to reserve against those assets. I can tell you from talking to bankers across the country that if the regulators do not give forbearance to these financial institutions, and they start forcing institutions to classify whole lines of business, classifying whole lines of business, there's going to be a real problem with a credit shortage in rural areas and in low MI communities. Do you believe the regulators should be providing this forbearance, and what do you think it should look like? Credit shortage in rural areas and in low MI communities.
So we are encouraging our supervisors to encourage banks to work with their borrowers and not to jump to criticized loans and to take on board the situation that we're in, and we're communicating with them a lot in that respect, and I hope that's getting through to the banks and that it's in fact then getting through to the borrowers. We don't want to force anything to automatically happen. I guess it's natural that in a situation like this, where businesses are partially closed or people aren't spending, you'll see concerns about credit. But this is clearly a temporary period, and we're just going to continue to urge banks to work with their customers, household and business customers. And
well, I appreciate that comment, sir. But and your earlier comments talked about some businesses struggling and the need for forbearance, and I appreciate that. But I can tell you, having gone through this PPP program, that the banks, with their accountants and attorneys close at hand, are very reluctant to do anything unless there is some physical guidance there, some words on paper that they can point to. And so I've got a bill to try and put something in place that they can point to give them the kind of forbearance and protection they need to be able to then give forbearance to the customers. My greatest fear is we wind up with a situation like 08 and 09 where the regulators go in and get rid of entire lines of business, close down entire industries, and hurt local communities and wind up taking banks in the process.
안녕하세요. 이거 스트리밍 되고 있는 거 맞나요? 맞으면 누가 댓글 좀 달아주세요. 안녕하세요. 이거 스트리밍 되고 있는 거 맞나요? 맞으면 누가 댓글 좀 달아주세요.
So we're trying to give them that, and we're also doing additional training of supervisors. And I just point out too that banks came into this quite well capitalized, and so that helps as well. There's going to be some more guidance, though, interagency guidance on post-pandemic exams and how we conduct those. So we're working away at it, and we really want to hear from banks and from supervisors and anybody who to the extent it looks like this is not getting through, because we really don't. This is effectively a natural disaster. We want to treat it like that.
Just a quick comment here. I know that the Secretary Mnuchin made a comment the other day that he's seeing an increase in deposits. I know anecdotally, locally here, there's the local banks in the area here. Looks like there's 20% increase in deposits. Savings have increased. Have you seen that same thing happening? What do you ascertain from that as to why and what kind of effect down the road it will have on the citizens of our country having that sort of money at hand ready to be spent?
Well, part of it is, the answer is yes. We're seeing a lot of that, and you saw it in the income data, where part Part of it is people are holding just very, very high levels in savings right now. And part of that is that they're getting, the PPP loans, and some of those turn up in personal bank accounts. It's also the enhanced unemployment insurance, and it's the checks, and they've been holding back. But I think getting to your point, what it is evidence that there's a lot of spending power, and we're starting to see that in the spending data. Yes, they've been holding back. But I think it bodes well for the next few months.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Vargas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Bodes well for the next few months.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Vargas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well for the next few months.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Vargas, you're recognized for 5 minutes. I'm going to go back to Mr. Stile. Has the problem been corrected with Mr. Stile?
I hope so, Chairwoman Waters. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Waters. Thank you very much for being with us here today, Chairman Powell. I look forward to being able to do these meetings in person as we work through some of the technical glitches here. During and immediately following the financial crisis of 2009, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet grew by north of $2 trillion, reaching about $4.5 trillion. In your comment following up to Congresswoman Ann Wagner's question, you noted that the Federal Reserve has been mostly holding to maturity. Wondering if you could comment what the economic indicators that you were looking at the Federal Reserve between 2009 into 2019 as the Federal Reserve dropped the balance sheet by roughly half of $1 trillion, and whether or not those same economic indicators will be guiding you as you make determinations in the Fed as to whether or not you'll be needing to hold those reserves all the way through their maturity, or if there will be opportunities to reduce the Fed's balance sheet in advance of that maturity.
So we waited until the economy was well down the path of recovery before we even thought about starting to shrink the size of the balance sheet. We waited and the other thing that we did was we froze the balance sheet at the end of 2014. We froze the size of the balance sheet. And the other thing, pardon me, for a period of 3 years, so that the economy was growing, and therefore the ratio of the size of the balance sheet to the economy was declining. And I think we declined from maybe 25% of GDP to maybe 17, 18%. So that's a passive way to allow the balance sheet to shrink relative to the economy. I think in this situation, we're thinking that we may do something like that, but it's so far down the road. I think we're at the beginning of the second phase of this process, the one where the economy begins to recover from the shutdown period, and that period will take some time, and then there'll probably be a lengthy period as we get back to full employment. So it'll be a while before we start really thinking about how to shrink the balance sheet. And I would say that at current levels or current planned levels, I think we know now that the balance sheet doesn't present issues in terms of either inflation or financial stability. Those were big concerns as we grew the balance sheet during the last crisis.
Obviously, we don't have the inflationary pressures today. I do hold some concerns that we may see inflationary pressures in the future as the Fed's balance sheet is now increased beyond $7 trillion. And obviously, you and your colleagues at the Federal Reserve will continue to watch that. Let me shift gears slightly. We've seen articles recently related to collateralized loan obligations or risks that may pose in the banking sector. I think what's important here to note is banking institutions came into this crisis with a much healthier balance sheet than they did in 2009. There was recently an article that was put forward identifying potential risks in the collateralized loan obligation space and indicating that banks may have broader systemic risk. Could you comment as to whether or not you hold that view, or whether or not you believe banks came in with a strong balance sheet and are therefore well capitalized to weather these challenges?
매도 주문이
The
체결되었습니다.
CLOs are quite different from the things that were problems back in the crisis. We have a lot of transparency into what's inside the
매도
CLOs.
주문이
We regularly include
체결되었습니다.
them in our annual stress tests. We stress them really hard to see what kind of losses they produce. And they're also,
매도 주문이
not
체결되었습니다.
they're not that large. I think it's less than 0.5% of the assets of the banks are in these CLOs. So it's something they contain leveraged loans. We've been all over that problem for several years and looking at it carefully. So I think the comparison to the global financial crisis is not the right one. Nonetheless, it's an issue we will continue to monitor.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you monitoring that as well because this increase in balance sheet and the risk that may pose to inflation down the road. Appreciate you being here today, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vargas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Appreciate you being here today, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vargas, you're recognized for 5 minutes. If Mr. Vargas is not present, we'll move on to Ms. Acne. Thank you. You're recognized. Please unmute yourself. Not present.
Good day, Chairwoman, and hello, Chairman Powell. Thank you so much for being with us again today, and thank you for all the good work that you do. We're very appreciative. Obviously, we know these are difficult times that we're in. For the second time in a dozen years, we're in a severe recession. I believe that in May, we saw that 20 million less Americans had jobs than they did 3 months prior. So unemployment's at its highest rate since World War II. And the Fed's projections have that remaining at almost 10% through the end of the year. We've also discussed, to make matters worse, that situation appears far worse for lower income workers than it does for others who are making more. Chairman Powell, you've somewhat alluded to it today, and I believe yesterday, I think you said you've been concerned about the overall deficit for the long term, but that the time to address that is when the economy is strong, not when we're in an economic crisis. Is that correct? For the long term, but that the time to address that is when the economy is strong, not when we're in an economic crisis. Is that correct? For the long term, but that the time.
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself again. So yes, I do think that ultimately the debt can't grow faster than the economy forever. That's sort of the definition of an unsustainable path. We've been on that for a while now, and we need to address it. We will have no choice. Ultimately, we have to address it. The time to do that is when unemployment is low and the economy is growing.
Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. Obviously, each recession is different, but I want to take a look back at the last one to see what lessons we learned, to see what we can look at to help deal with this one. I had an opportunity back in the 2009 stimulus bill timeframe that I know we devoted about 20% of that total aid to fiscal support for state budgets, and that's when I was working at the state of Iowa and in charge of supervising some of that funding. One thing that I saw was that when that assistance started to end in 2010, because of balanced budget requirements that we have, for instance, the state of Iowa, we had to cut budgets, meaning teachers, firefighters, public servants, etc., lost their jobs. And then I've also seen some research from the International Monetary Fund and others showing that these cuts were a drag on the economy for several years afterwards, and some of those estimates showing that the jobs lost due to these cuts actually offset the job growth in the public sector entirely. Does that impact seem like it might be part of the reason why the recovery from 2008 recession was so slow?
Yes, that is a finding that economic research has come up with, I think, pretty clearly.
I appreciate that. It seems like we're in agreement that supporting state and local budgets is a key step to supporting the recovery process. I know we're absolutely trying to work on getting that piece through the House, and it's something that I've worked on. Do you think that that's something Congress needs to be doing more on to make sure that we recover our economy? And it's something that I've worked on.
As you point out, state and local governments are large employers and they provide critical services to people, and there's a balanced budget provision effectively in every state or almost every state. And so when there's under budget problems, what happens is you see layoffs and cutbacks in essential services. Both of those create not just human misery, but they also weigh on the economy. So I do think it's an area where for for Congress to look.
Well, thank you. Obviously, we're trying to push that through. I actually have a bill that I wrote previously that directly supports state and local governments for lost revenue to ensure that these job cuts don't happen again. I appreciate all that you're doing to help us shore up our economy at this point, give us the guidance and the oversight that we need. And I'm grateful for your feedback here today. I hope that we can move a state and local government bill forward. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Huizinga. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Move a state and local government bill forward.
Thank you, Madam
so much,
Chair.
and
I
yield
appreciate
back.
it. And I, like the ranking member, just think of our mutual friend Andy Barr right now and his daughters. And I know, Chairman, he would love to be here to grill you about a number of issues, as he and I had both previously chaired the Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee. But I need to touch base on the paycheck protection. Sorry, two things. Main Street business that is not eligible to paycheck protection program. And as you well know, a huge part of our manufacturing economy is in automobiles, especially automobile parts. Those account for about 900,000 jobs, 125,000 of those here in Michigan alone. And what we are seeing and hearing from the large automobile manufacturers is their concern for their suppliers. And those suppliers are telling me, which I have a tremendous number of it here in the 2nd District of Michigan, that they were having some liquidity issues. Not that they don't have been properly funded previously, but it's about liquidity right now. Last month, I joined with my Michigan colleagues in asking the administration to create a fund that provides short-term lending assistance to medium-sized companies in the motor vehicle parts sector using necessary capital from the Main Street lending program. Now, you had said, and I had written it down, I think you had said we are there in standing up the Main Street program. I'm not as convinced, I guess, of that, and I'd like to make sure that you can commit and maybe clarify what that means. We need to have this up now. And what I really want to know is, will you commit to working with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin to add a dedicated program for the auto sector focused on size companies, keep production for key links in the motor vehicle part manufacturing viable? If we lose them, that is going to be a huge part of our to be hit. I wonder if you'll commit to working on that.
So the facility is open now for lenders to register. So those companies will have banks that they work with that are their regular partners in business, and those banks should be in the process of registering with the Boston Fed to become an approved lender in the Main Street facility. At that point, they can make Main Street loans right away, and in very shortly they'll be able to put 95% interest in those loans. So we're there effectively if their banks are.
How about a separate facility within that?
95% interest in those. We try to set. We don't do facilities for individual industries. What we do is we set. I mean, the requirements that we've set up should be a very good fit for the companies you're talking about. Essentially, we're looking at 2019 financials, and you can borrow at a multiple of your 2019 EBITDA. So, and that could either be 4 or 6, depending on the kind of a loan you want, and the kind of company it is. But so these would be they would be a perfectly good fit for this facility. And we don't do facilities that are designed for individual industries. We do facilities of broad applicability, and anybody who meets those requirements can borrow.
So I hear no program dedicated to the automotive industry, correct?
That's right. Who meets those requirements.
Okay, I think that's a mistake. However, I need to move along to another unintended consequence, I believe, as part of the Paycheck Protection Program, and a company that is not able to take part in that, but is waiting for this Main Street lending program. I have a company here in here in Michigan, in the district that probably many of my colleagues have had their product, Lacombe. It's coffee, and a 26-year-old, very fast-growing company that has manufacturing facilities here, a couple of hundred constituents, but they're all based in Philadelphia. For the last 6 years, they have been focused on growth, and they also means they've had to borrow funds, which has led to accumulation of quite a bit of debt. The rules are currently written so that Lacombe would not qualify to participate in the Main Street lending program. I believe the way that the leverage ratio requirements in the program is currently drafted, it unfairly punishes companies such as Lacombe that would otherwise be viewed as true American success stories when using different metrics. As if the rules are currently written, it's designed to prevent funds from going to the companies that need them most. And I understand that you're not wanting to deal with over-leveraged companies being bailed out, but we're talking about growing companies that have had to accumulate debt. I'm working on with some colleagues partisan letter that would help that. So we'd appreciate if there would be a ratio
매도
1-to-1
주문이
in the
체결되었습니다.
last 12 to 18 months and the ability to access that would help that. Then we'd appreciate it or to hearing from you.
매도 주문이
For either of those
체결되었습니다.
kinds of companies, if we're missing something, then we want to understand that. And we've been willing to adapt these programs consistently. So we'll look forward to talking about it. If we're missing
Wonderful.
something,
Thank you.
then
Appreciate it.
we want to understand that.
Thank you. Mr. McAdams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Powell, for being with us and for your leadership during this difficult economic situation due to the coronavirus. So, Chair Powell, since the last time you were before this committee, the OCC moved ahead with its rewrite of the Community Reinvestment Act, or the CRA. In light of the renewed focus by Congress to address racism and systemic issues throughout our economy and throughout our nation, I think it's particularly important that we get the CRA correct. And since its purpose its historical purpose was to address redlining against Black and minority individuals, communities, and to have financial institutions meet to address credit these communities. So I think many of my colleagues share my concerns that the OCC's rule misses the mark and probably does more harm than good. And I'm glad that the Fed did not sign on to the rulemaking. In January, Governor Leo Brainerd gave a speech on how to strengthen the CRA. And in that speech, she said, quote, "By sharing our work publicly, we hope to solicit public input on a broader set of options for reform and find a way forward, a way toward interagency agreement on the best approach." So now that the OCC has finalized its rules, is there any update that you can provide for the committee on how or when the Fed may move forward on any of the public input it received on its CRA framework?
Sure. So first of all, CRA is for us a extremely important law. And we agreed that it's a good time to update it. We would want to update it in a way that has broad support among the community of intended beneficiaries. That's always been our one non-negotiable condition for it. So we're still working on it, and I do think we'll move forward with it. I don't have much for you on the timing of it, but there's been a lot of great work done, and I like where we are on it in terms of the things the ways we've been thinking about it. Modernizing it. We will ultimately move forward, and I can't say exactly when, but we're not going to let that work go to waste.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about that and following that. Next question. My perception is that Congress and the Fed have done a decent job of keeping the economy on life support. We clearly aren't doing great yet, and the response has been uneven, but you have double-digit unemployment numbers and higher unemployment rates for African Americans, for instance, and some sectors are hit harder than others. I think Congress had the option, we had the option when this pandemic broke out, of acting quickly or acting perfectly, and I think we chose to act quickly, and I think that was the right call. But by my calculation, the Fed has allocated a little over $200 billion of the $454 billion that Congress allocated to the Treasury and Fed in the CARES Act. Some of that funding was set aside for the Main Street facility that you've already discussed and other facilities. My question is, how do you intend to use the remaining funds? I understand that it takes time to set up various facilities, but I also worry that if we don't move fast enough, and business and individuals and communities, may suffer as a result. To set up various facilities.
First, let me agree that I think the actions, the fiscal actions that you took were incredibly timely, and I think will be very well judged over time. Even though, of course, nothing's perfect. It's an emergency. Do the best you can. I think the PPP program, the UI program, the checks. I think all of it is going to wear well over time. It's certainly helping the economy out through what could have been so much worse of a situation. In terms of the rest of the CARES Act money, it's there when and as we need it. We have a lot more ability to use our lending powers should that be necessary, should it be appropriate. We're certainly willing to do that. I think we've kind of gotten to maybe the end of the beginning here, and now we're getting into the phase of the reopening of the economy. But that money is there if it's needed. Of course, the Secretary of the Treasury actually has the legal authority to deploy that money as he sees fit. But it would be one of the things you can do is put it in our programs, and we stand ready to do more if more needs to be done.
You see that essentially as being more of the same as necessary, or is there anything else you're looking at? Any other gaps that keep you up at night? You see that essentially.
I think we've covered now we've got nonprofits now in Main Street. That'll take us some time. We've got small, medium, and large companies. We've got state and local governments. I think we've covered a lot of the waterfront. We're always open to additional ideas. Mainly, it's a lot of execution now and just continuing to improve what we've done, make it do its job better.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mainly, it's a lot of execution now.
Thank you, Mr. Vargas. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Do its job better.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Vargas.
Just want you to know that I never abandoned you. I was here the whole time. My microphone wasn't working.
Can you hear me?
It was sad note to hear the news of Andy's wife and family. Andy's a friend to all of us, as you know. He on our side too. We love him, and that's really tragic. And I know that we'll all keep his wife and his family, especially now, in our prayers. And again, thank you, Mr. McHenry, for letting us know. I don't agree with Mr. Heck that Mr. Powell that I'm in favor of a lifetime appointment for you. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't shorten your life like that. I think you're too much of a good guy. That wouldn't be fair at all. But I do have to commend you. I think that you're one of those what I would call those Republicans of old, stable, dignified, intelligent, fair, charitable. And I think everyone's been looking to you for guidance. And I think that you've been just the right person at the right time. And again, I do want to commend you. And I also want to commend you for highlighting the disproportionate impact that this pandemic has had on communities of color, Latinos, African Americans, and especially the poor. My district is composed of all of Imperial County, which is a border county here to Mexico, and part of San Diego County. Over 70% of my district is Latino. The unemployment rate in Imperial County is a striking 28% in April. That's what it was. And that's basically the same rate that we had during the Great Recession there, 25 to 30%. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics currently states that as of April, the unemployment rate in San Diego County also increased to about 15%. Taking a closer look specifically in the areas I represent, such as San Isidro, which is right on the border, National City, the next little city up, Chula Vista, the next city up, and then the city of San Diego. The unemployment here in April was about 20%. The disproportionate impact of this pandemic on our economy is clear in my district. What policies has the Fed pursued specifically on reducing the high rates of unemployment for African Americans and Latinos during this pandemic? And what policies has the Fed put in place to help ensure that Latinos, African Americans are not suffering from this disproportionately high unemployment rates as we emerge from this recession?
I'm tempted to say that all of our policies are focused on that problem. The way this pandemic worked is it hit companies and parts of the economy that were in service economy companies, which involved getting people together, in tight quarters and either feeding them or giving them drinks or flying them around or entertaining them. And those are service jobs which happen to be overly represented. The workforce happens to be consist to a large measure of low and moderate income communities and minorities. So an extraordinarily large portion of those laid off are from those parts of the economy, and of course it has, as the numbers show, fallen heavily on the Latin population as well as African Americans and women. So we, the tools we have are the tools we have. So we're supporting the flow of credit in the economy to companies so that they don't, so that they don't feel financial stress. We're trying to create an environment in which people have the very best chance to go back to their old job or to get a new job. That's really what all of our efforts are about. Nothing more, nothing less.
But Mr. Chairman, I think that you know that and I agree with you, the type of job that you just described also relies a lot on tourism and restaurants and that service economy. And they seem to be the last ones that are going to come out of this recession. People don't feel comfortable going back. So without unemployment insurance and the enhancement, I mean, how are these people going to make it?
That's exactly I think that we're going to see lots and lots of people go back to work here in the next few months. We believe that. But the people who are in those parts of the service industry, tourism, of course, a big one, they're going to struggle. Many of them will struggle until the pandemic is really in the history books. So that's going to be a problem. I think those people are going to need support. It may be difficult to find jobs in that industry at all, and I think we're going to need to support them and help them. As Congress did in the global financial crisis, I think as the years wore on, Congress, re-upped employment insurance a number of times just to keep people in their apartment, keep them there, not being evicted, not having to move into a shelter or move into a crowded place. By the way, that's going to be a place where the disease can spread more quickly too. So I do think it's important that we provide that kind of help.
And I appreciate those words, and I hope you use your influence as you can to make sure that happens. I do have to ask this, though. One of the things that you said was this pandemic was it's over. Again, thank you very much for being here and continue to be the person you are. We have a lot of faith in you. Thank you. One of the things that you said was this pandemic was
Mr. Taylor, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Chair, appreciate you being here. We are all concerned about the economy as it goes to recover in jobs. Something that is of deep concern to me are the properties that have long-term mortgages where the lender has very little flexibility in their ability to forbear. We as a Congress saw the need to forbear, for lenders to forbear. The OCC provided guidance on March 13th, encouraging banks, which are the biggest lenders in our economy, to forbear. We have given guidance to Fannie and Freddie to forbear. We have worked on legislation and financing, trying to help encourage forbearance. There are pockets of the economy where there is not the ability for the lenders to forbear at a level that is going to help them get to the other side. I'm specifically concerned about 3 subsectors in real estate: hospitality, student housing, and indoor retail, where it is going, because of the pandemic, they have no cash flow, or very little cash flow. They cannot service their mortgages. They cannot service, they can't pay for the utilities. They can't pay for insurance. They can't pay that property tax. I've been working with a lot of members on this committee and in Congress, Republican and Democrat, from all over the country, who share this concern. I perceive that absent action by this body, by Congress, by the federal government, we're going to see a wave of foreclosures beginning in the fall and going through next spring. That impact on jobs, I think, will be very material, as people who are working for hotels, working in indoor retail, people who are student housing, where you have a university town that needs to have the housing to have to run the university, where those foreclosures are going to be very serious, particularly when they're foreclosed, the property itself is closed. The foreclosure does not have the expertise or the capital to reopen that business. So, assuming that you were to see things the way I see it, where there's a coming cataclysm, person here to reopen that business. Do you have the statutory authority, you and the Treasury, to open up the Main Street Lending Program or any of your other programs to provide lending authority to someone to then in turn help these properties that are in trouble that can't make their mortgage? To provide lending authority
So there are limits, as I think you're referring to, in what we can do. We of course, there are lending powers, and they're very explicit in the law. We have to
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
so we're adequately secured, and we cannot lend to insolvent borrowers. So there are lines that we can't cross.
정정
Within
주문
that,
접수
we can take
완료되었습니다.
a lot of risk, and you know, the question is for companies like that, you really hit the most affected sectors. It's we would have to be lending on some sort of an asset based.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
We're looking at.
I know you're looking at that, and my question again, it's a yes or no question.
정정
Can you
주문
do
접수
this without an act
완료되었습니다.
of Congress, or do we, Congress, need to take an act to give you the authority? Do you have the authority today?
정정
If
주문
you
접수
decided, hey, this is important, we
완료되었습니다.
got to do it, we can make these loans to the lower leverage, healthier properties to try to get them to the other side. I've got a liquidity, right? If we get them to the
취소
other
주문
side,
접수
we'll be able to
완료되었습니다.
redeploy people and communities will survive. There are whole communities that are going to die or be very badly
취소
impaired if
주문
they
접수
lose their
완료되었습니다.
hospitalities or lose, shopping centers that are extremely important to that community. Do you have the authority, or does Congress need to act to give you the
My guess is, without seeing the numbers, if you're talking about low leverage situations where it really is the liquidity problem, we have that authority. We do have that authority. Some of the cases, though, it's fully companies
just
fully really is.
right? So if you look at collateralized mortgage-backed security loan in the hospitality space, the average leverage level is 63%. So that puts it, so normal real estate is normally levered, 15 to 17 times EBITDA space, kind of put it in Main Street terms. That's well outside the range of what you can, what you have stated by rule that you can do. Again, my question is, do I have to pass a law so that you can then go lend into this space, or do you have the authority right now to say, you know what, there is a problem, we're going to go take action? Do I have to pass a law?
Yeah, I think some of the problems in that space will be better served by fiscal policy. I think we can probably reach some of them as well. So the answer is both.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Wexton, you are granted 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for joining us again today and for all that you're doing in these difficult times. One of the most stabilizing things that Congress did in the CARES Act was to expand unemployment benefits by increasing the benefits by an extra $600 per week on top of those benefits that the state provides. In Virginia, our maximum weekly benefit was $378, so the extra money has been a huge relief to the over 822,000 Virginians who have filed for unemployment benefits since March 15th. But these unemployment benefits, these enhanced benefits, are set to expire at the end of July. Do you anticipate the unemployment rate falling significantly by that time? Unemployment benefits, these enhanced benefits, are set to expire at the end of July. Do you anticipate the
I would say reasonably, many forecasters would say, and I would agree, that we should see strong job creation between now and the end of July. Yes, and that may mean that the unemployment rate comes down.
So one of the arguments against continuing this benefit is that it's too generous. Some of my colleagues are suggesting that employers are having a hard time getting employees to come back to work because employment is more lucrative than what they make in their regular job. Is that something that you've encountered as far as your regional surveys of business activity or in the data? Have you gotten any information that employers are trying to hire people back and that they're having trouble doing so because the employees say, I'd rather just kick back and collect my unemployment?
So here's what we've been hearing. Sort of a little bit different from that. Employers, many employees are reluctant to go back quickly. And it may partly be that that the $600 is generous compared to what they make. We know that many of them weren't making that much. combined with the other unemployment insurance. But it's also, if it's a service economy job and you're very close to
정정 주문
someone,
접수 완료되었습니다.
it's a nail salon, any of those things, there's also still reluctance on the part of workers to go back to work.
정정 주문
And if they can
접수
delay that,
완료되었습니다.
more broadly, I would say, that's of course.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
Just say,
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
probably is going to be important that it be continued in some form.
정정 주문
I wouldn't
접수
say what form,
완료되었습니다.
but you wouldn't want to
정정
go
주문
all the way to
접수
zero.
완료되었습니다.
I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Chairman. And that's
정정 주문
you said
접수
about
완료되었습니다.
people not feeling
정정 주문
comfortable going back to
접수
work is pretty
완료되었습니다.
consistent with what I'm hearing anecdotally.
정정 주문
That people
접수
are
완료되었습니다.
concerned about the
정정
safety
주문
that they have
접수
of
완료되었습니다.
who's elderly or
정정 주문
has
접수
compromised immune system.
완료되었습니다.
And also, you know, a lot of
정정 주문
people
접수
in my district, and I would
완료되었습니다.
imagine it's the
정정
same
주문
in
접수
Hamilton Wyeth, are having
완료되었습니다.
trouble accessing childcare at this time because many of those centers have closed.
정정
So
주문
that's a real
접수
issue for a lot of people.
완료되었습니다.
Now, former Fed chairs Yellen and Bernanke
정정 주문
have
접수
endorsed a proposal,
완료되었습니다.
which is the Worker Relief and
정정
Security
주문
Act,
접수
that would tie
완료되었습니다.
federal unemployment benefits to the state of the economy.
정정 주문
For
접수
example, changes in the
완료되었습니다.
unemployment rate. Do
정정
you
주문
agree
접수
that we should
완료되었습니다.
tie assistance to the conditions in the economy, or what are your thoughts on the processes that would have set triggers for the legislation and for the benefits to continue?
So I think, you've got almost 2 months, month and a half really, until the end of the UI program. And I think you're seeing a lot of interesting ideas come up. There are a number of proposals that have come out from bipartisan groups, and I think it's, you're no doubt you're thinking, what should the next bit of support look like? And I think some of those ideas are very interesting ones that would be. I don't want to endorse a particular idea or program that somebody's proposed, but I do think those things are worth careful consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for all of your transparency in the programs that the Fed is administering, and also for your having these listening sessions, and for your willingness to make changes to those businesses that might be eligible for the program, in terms of the money amounts and things like that, by opening it up to more people. And I really appreciate your responsiveness to us in the community. And thank you. And Madam Chair, with that, I will yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you. And Madam Chair, with that, I will yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you. And Madam Chair, with
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chairman Powell, for your testimony and your willingness to be so accessible. I want to thank you for everything you're doing during this crisis. I think your actions have prevented this from getting much worse. I take your answers pretty seriously about what we need to do for people that are still impacted by this crisis, especially folks who are still seeing a lot of unemployment and that aren't benefiting from this coming recovery, and we need to try to help them. And you just answered a question a little bit. You don't want to endorse any one proposal, but is there are there elements that you think are important without endorsing one single proposal?
I think a couple of things. I think with the unemployment insurance, I think it's important to just keep in mind that some of the jobs are not coming back soon. They ultimately are likely to come back. But those jobs that are in tourism and all those areas where travel, accommodation, restaurants, bars, things like that, those people, they are going to have a hard time finding a job. So I think better to keep them in their apartment, better to keep them paying their bills. And this is a natural disaster. This isn't, this isn't their fault. And I think we should find ways as a country to support those people and help them through this difficult part of their lives. I think many people will go back to work. I think the other one I would mention, and we've talked about it, is just, state and local governments do provide those critical services. And I think the other one I would mention, we know what happens when they can't run deficits, and so they cut heads, and they're already doing that. I think that's another one which is worth looking at. And the last thing I'll say is absolutely small businesses. You know, we don't want to lose any more small businesses than we absolutely have to here. I mean, they are the beating heart of the economy. And, so I just think those are three areas I would point to. Can I also just take a second and say, I was very, very sorry to see the news about Andy Barr's wife this morning. He's been a great guy to work with. He's a happy warrior. He's a wonderful man. And I know we all feel terrible about it, and he's in our prayers.
Thanks for bringing that up, Mr. Chairman. They're great friends, and we're definitely keeping the family in our prayers. And I know Andy said this morning his number one job is being a dad to his two daughters that now have lost their mom. So we're keeping him in our prayers, and I really appreciate you bringing it up. And I do want to follow up on something you just talked about. In one of the first COVID response bills, we did include $150 billion for local governments and state governments, but we tied that money. We said it had to be used only for COVID response. And I hope that we will, in what you just said, at the very least, untie the strings on that money to start, and then see if local governments and state governments need any more money. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but I hope we'll do that in the spirit of the second part of your answer. Obviously, we want to focus on folks who are going to continue to be unemployed and small businesses too. So those are three great pillars, and I really appreciate it. So with interest rates at a near record low, another thing we could do for our state and local governments, our municipal governments, is allow advance refunding so they could take advantage of these historically low interest rates in the capital markets. I don't know how the capital markets would respond to that, but it's another thing that I hope we will do. And I thought I'd bring that up since you just mentioned the importance of state and local governments. Again, I won't ask you to comment on that because frankly, it's not in your purview. So the Federal Reserve did note in its May 2020 financial stability report that the life insurance industry has been adversely affected by a number of factors caused by the COVID-19 economic situation, including that near zero interest rate environment I just brought up. Do you think the near zero interest rate environment is a big impact on our insurance folks? And what help do you think that we should give to make sure that, and I don't know that it's any kind of aid, but obviously we want to help people that are nearing retirement and help people that are savers. What can we do to impact that, knowing that the interest rate probably will not go up anytime right away? What can we do?
So, you know, the life insurance industry is challenged by low interest rates, and they've had a lot of practice here in the last decade or so. They do come into this highly capitalized, and I would just say, you know, a strong recovery is really what that industry needs, and that's what we're going to work on.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, I want to say, you know, I appreciate you. I appreciate you in there swinging. You've been helping us on the unemployment. You've been helping us on trying to get some of this money out to Main Street. Very happy to see your revisions recently on the Main Street lending program. And I want to thank Chairwoman Waters for her relentless advocacy to get that minimum loan size down. It started out at, what was it, $1 billion? And then now it's 250,000. So, no, it was $1 million. It was $1 million first. Now, what was it, $1 billion? And then now it's 250,000. So, no, it was $1 million. It was $1 million first. Now, what was it, $1 billion? And now it's 250,000. So, no, it was $1 million. It was $1 million first. Now, what was it, $1 billion? And then now it's 250,000. So, no, it was $1 million. It was $1 million first. Now, what was it, $1 billion? And now it's 250,000. So, no, it was $1 million. It was $1 million first. Now, what was it, $1 billion? And then now it's 250,000. So, no, it was $1 million. It was $1 million first. Now, $1 billion. And now it's 250,000. So,
안녕하세요. 안녕하세요. 안녕하세요.
매도 주문이 체결되었습니다. 매도 주문이 체결되었습니다. 매도 주문이 체결되었습니다. 정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다. 매수 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 주문이 체결되었습니다.
원격 수업에 최적화된 신개념 프로젝터 앱설 초단 초점 인터랙티브 프로젝터. 원격 수업에 최적화된 신개념 프로젝터 앱설 초단 초점 인터랙티브 프로젝터. 원격 수업에 최적화된 신개념 프로젝터 앱설 초단 초점 인터랙티브 프로젝터. 원격 수업에 최적화된 신개념 프로젝터 앱설 초단 초점 인터랙티브 프로젝터. 원격 수업에 최적화된 신개념 프로젝터 앱설 초단 초점 인터랙티브 프로젝터.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Please, thank you. Good afternoon. And before we begin, 5 years ago, 9 innocent parishioners of a historically black church, you all remember this horrible event, 5 years ago, were tragically killed during an evening Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina. That was a despicable act of evil. Today we remember this somber day as our hearts still break for the victims, and our prayers go with all. That was a terrible event. It was a terrible day. Terrible, terrible day for our country, for the world to witness. Thank you very much for being with us at the White House as we reaffirm our sacred promise to support and protect our great veterans. We love our veterans, and great they are. With honor and courage, these incredible patriots perform their duty to America, and now we must fulfill our duty to them, and that's what we're doing. And we're doing it beyond what anyone's ever done as president or as an administration. Fulfill our duty to them. We're gathered together to address an especially urgent struggle. Today we're unveiling our roadmap to empower veterans and end the national tragedy of suicide. Tremendous problem. Roadmap to empower veterans. My administration is marshaling every resource to stop the crisis of veteran suicide and protect our nation's most treasured heroes. They've been through so much to stop the crisis. It's such a deep-seated problem. And protect our nation. We're doing tremendous research and everything we can do. They've been through so much, but it is something that's a seated problem. Nobody quite understands. Tremendous research and everything. Gaining knowledge, but they don't quite understand it. But it is something. And I want to thank our Vice President for being with us. And I especially want to thank, frankly, wonderful Karen Pence, who is so committed to the veterans and this particular problem. And thank you very much. I appreciate it. Wonderful Karen Pence, who is so committed to the veterans and this particular problem. And thank you very much. Here as well are several members of Prevent's task force. Prevent's, it's called Prevent's. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Robert members of Prevent's. Great job. Prevent's, 90% approval rating. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Robert, way up, 90%. 90% approval rating. That's a number that has not way up, not even come close to attaining that number. So it's a tremendous job you're doing. Thank you very much. That's a number that Secretary of Labor, Jean Scalia, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. Secretary of Alex, thank you. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the great Ben Carson. Thank you, Ben. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Thanks, Betsy. And Acting Director of OMB, Russ Vogt. Thank you, Russ, very much. Also with us are Surgeon General Jerome Adams. Where's Jerome? Jerome, hi, Jerome. And he got a standing ovation the other day. I introduced him. He got the only standing ovation, Jerome. What was that all about? And the Executive Director of Prevent's Task Force, Dr. Barbara Van Dalen. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And representatives from several of our nation's leading veterans groups. We have tremendous people in this room, people that work so hard for the veterans, and they love our military, they love our country, they love our veterans. Thank you all for being here very much appreciated. From day one, my administration has been on a mission of historic scope and scale to deliver results for our great veterans. After years of shameful scandal and neglect under the Obama-Biden administration, and scandal and neglect it was, we have fundamentally reorganized the VA from top to bottom, and we've reestablished a crucial principle. American veterans deserve the highest standard of care anywhere in the world, and that's what they're getting. Great leadership. To help veterans get the care they need when they need it, we approved Veterans Choice and made it permanent, and that was a big deal. They've been trying to get it for decades and decades and decades, and we got it. We got it done. And basically that means if you have a problem and you can't get to a doctor, it doesn't work, you end up going outside, you get your doctor, we pay the bill, and they get immediate service. Some of the veterans were forced in past administrations for a long time, beyond the Obama administration even, but for a long time they were expected to wait a week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks just to get to see a doctor. It was a terrible situation. Now we have Veterans Choice. They've been trying to get it so long, and it works incredibly well. And I would say that's a reason why, when I say 90% approval rating, that's probably one of the big reasons. Before I took office, every month seemed to bring a new story of crisis at the VA by our friends from the media. But the days of endless and deadly wait lists are over, and they are never going to come back. We're never going to allow them. Nobody can allow that to come back, what our vets had to put up with. I signed the VA Accountability Act into law, and we've removed more than 9,000 VA workers who were not giving our veterans the care, respect, attention that they've earned. And now that we have accountability, it's accountability, very nice word. If an employee of government mistreats our veterans in any way, does something wrong, isn't good for the VA, the secretary looks at them and says, "You're fired, get out." Before you couldn't do that. We had people for years and years. We had stories, I could tell you, story after story, how bad it was. You had sadists, you had thieves, you had some bad, bad people. So 9,000 have been fired. And they should have been fired a long time ago, but we got accountability, VA accountability passed. We secured record funding for the VA, including $9.6 billion for mental health services in 2020.
매도 주문이 체결되었습니다.
Every VA medical facility now offers same-day emergency mental health, something we didn't have or even come close to having. We have dramatically expanded telehealth for our nation's veterans. And with COVID, it's really become probably the hottest thing there is in medicine, wouldn't you say? I think so. It's gone up in terms of usage by hundreds of times. It was not picking up until COVID came along, and now it's one of the hottest things you have going in the medical world, allowing people to consult with doctors from the comfort of their homes and not having to go out and not having to make long trips, and they get tremendous advice, I hope.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
Hotline that I've been talking about has fielded more than 400,000 calls right in the White House, successfully resolving 98% of veterans' concerns. It's a great thing. We have substantially cut the wait time for veteran appeals, ensuring all issues are resolved in a swift and timely fashion. It goes very quickly now, very, very quickly. We're modernizing medical records to begin a seamless transition from the Department of Defense to the VA, something others have tried and failed to do. They've tried it for decades, a long time. They wanted to do it. It's actually not as easy as it sounds, getting it done, but we got it done. The VA has also cut opioid prescriptions by 35% since 2000.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
And we're committed to defeating the opioid epidemic in America. We've brought it down by as much as 17%,
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
19, 20% in other areas. But that still means you have a lot left, and but a lot of good things are happening. I have to say, our border, where much of this comes in, drugs come in, we have a
매수 주문이 체결되었습니다.
It's all the same big problem, but our border is now as secure as it's been in many, many years. It's the wall is now up to mile 212.
취소 주문 접수
We
완료되었습니다.
have the wall that takes care of that area completely, but we're now down to among the lowest numbers we've ever had on the border, and we have. I want to thank the President of Mexico because we have 17,000 troops right now on the border, Mexican troops, and really helping us a lot. 17,000 troops right now. The number of veterans who say they trust the VA services has increased 19% under this administration. That's a tremendous increase. But I'm still more impressed. It's an all-time high, by the way, but I'm still more impressed by the 90 to 91% number. That's the number I'm going to use from now on. All right, can I do that, Robert? I like that. 91%. Can you imagine if you were a politician, you had a 91% approval rate? That would be pretty good. But there's more work to do. Ending the tragedy of veteran suicide demands bold action at every level of society. 20 veterans and service members take their own lives every single day. The loss of our heroes breaks our hearts and pains our souls. 1 year ago, I signed an executive order establishing Prevent's Task Force to develop a nationwide strategy to support our veterans in distress and stop the grave tragedy of veteran suicide. Today, thanks to the leadership of Secretary Wilkie, it's been outstanding. I'm proud to announce that we are taking this critical initiative to the next level. Following the ambitious roadmap the task force has developed over the last year, you'll see things happening that nobody would have ever thought even possible. To lead this effort, Mrs. Pence and a team of ambassadors that she was very much involved with in choosing, including the Surgeon General, Jerome Adams. You're only there, Jerome, because Mrs. Pence wanted you there, okay? That's a nice compliment. She's tough. That's a nice compliment. We'll launch a national public awareness campaign in the coming months. This historic campaign will mobilize every sector of American society to encourage heroes in need, empower them with the best prevention practices, and help every veteran thrive in their lives after service. They come home from these active battlefields and active places, and all of a sudden they're left sometimes alone, and you have a hard time with it. They fought our battles overseas, and now we must join them in winning this new battle at home. There's no single solution to this issue. Every resource must be brought to bear. We're expanding our partnerships with military and veteran organizations, universities, faith-based leaders, businesses, nonprofits, and all levels of government to establish specialized support systems for our veterans. The task force has already partners with 30 large corporations to help them prioritize the mental health of their employees, and we will continue adding to that number, and the number is growing very rapidly, very, very rapidly. We're also launching a national research strategy. The Prevents Office will work with the greatest scientific minds across our nation to evaluate research to better understand the trauma service members face. They face tremendous trauma. Identify effective treatments and communicate their findings to the public. The Prevents Office is currently reviewing the $1.5 billion of federal funding committed to suicide prevention to make sure research goes where it is most needed in order to save lives and to make lives better. Here with us today is former Marine and Coast Guardsman Chad Heiser, who can share with us his personal testimony about the importance of the steps we're taking today. And Chad, if I could, please, would you say a few words? Thank you.
Mr. President, distinguished guests, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on this vital mission. that affects the veteran community so much. The Bible says in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." God never wastes a hurt. These are the words I was told long ago by a mentor and friend, but never really understood their impact until I began the healing process from my trauma that I experienced in combat as a United States Marine. On March 23rd, 2003, in one horrific day, 18 Marines were killed that were part of Task Force Tarawa during the invasion of Iraq at the Battle of Al-Naziriyah. 3 days later, there was a friendly fire incident which rounds were mistakenly fired, resulting in the injury of Marines. After being honorably discharged at the end of my enlistment, I returned home feeling guilty for surviving, shame for feeling like I hadn't done enough. The war was still in my mind. I was detached physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I was angry and isolated from the world, including my family. Just 1 year after leaving the Marines, I decided to return to military service, this time with the United States Coast Guard, seeking a last-ditch effort to cope with the pain and regain my purpose in life. Unfortunately, my condition only worsened. In 2005, I attempted suicide. I was transported to a medical hospital, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and shortly after I was medically retired. During this time, my wife was praying. She was asking God to help heal me from this combat trauma. I felt there was no one I could turn to, that my life just wasn't worth living. As a tough Marine, I was hesitant to seek the help I truly needed to recover. 2009, by God's grace and mercy, I was saved by Jesus Christ. After carrying these burdens that I had carried for so long, the newfound hope I had was my foundation now. In 2011, I participated in Wounded Warrior Project's Project Odyssey, a combat recovery retreat. For the first time since returning from combat, I was able to open up about my own personal experiences and help further my own recovery process. This was truly a turning point in my life. That gave me a sense of new direction. As a Wounded Warrior Project peer mentor, warrior leader, and national campaign team member, I am fully committed to serving the veteran community by giving my time and attention to listen, empathize, and encourage and help carry the burden shared by countless veterans facing similar struggles after war. I've realized through my own experience how vital it is for veterans to have a positive support system, not only within our families and communities, but also within our government. Showing support and caring for those who are hurting. It's also important to let everyone know, let the country know, that they can be strong and ask for help if you are struggling. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for your decision to implement this important initiative combating mental health and suicide crisis within the veteran community. I am so grateful for your actions in insisting veterans to get the help they need at such a critical time. Your leadership in this matter truly shows your care for our nation's warriors. Thank you.
매도 주문이 체결되었습니다. 정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
fantastic, Chad. Thank you very much. I thought because she's so important to what we're doing, I could just, prior to Secretary Wilkie, ask Karen Pence
취소 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
to be leading us into the promised land.
매도 주문이 체결되었습니다.
Tough subject. Do you mind? Please. Either one, Karen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to say thank you for this administration realizing that this is an issue that we need to face head on. You are changing the culture. It's the leadership at the top. It's people like Chad being willing to be vulnerable. It's people like Dr. Van Dalen leading the whole task force of real experts who have been dealing with the suicide issue for many decades. And now all of us are coming together. We came together.
잠정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
We talked about how we wanted to go forward with this initiative. And I feel like right now is such an
잠정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
We're all dealing with anxiety. We're all dealing with stress right now. So if I can do anything as lead ambassador, it's my goal to help take away the stigma of mental health, take away the stigma for people to be able to come forward like Chad to say, there was a time in my life where I wanted to end everything. And our veterans, I've met with so many of them who say to me, I don't go to that dark place anymore. And so we are giving them hope. We want them to know, and anyone who's considering suicide, that there are people out there who want
매수 주문이 체결되었습니다.
to forward, and I just am so grateful and honored to be lead ambassador for Prevents. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So she had no idea I was going to do that, but I have to say that I did it about 2 months ago. I said, maybe Karen wants to say a few words. And she got up and she spoke for 5 minutes. She blew everybody away. She was the star, right, Mike? And I said, come on, Karen, you got to go. Great. Really appreciate it. You're going to do a fantastic job. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, let's go.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have been accused by some in this room of living in the 19th century and looking back on American history before I make any decisions. And I'm going to plead guilty to that for a second here and say that in the history of presidential campaigns and then later the administrations of a victorious candidate, there has never been a
매도 주문이 체결되었습니다.
who put veterans front and center first of the campaign and
매도 주문이 체결되었습니다.
until you did. I'm going to speak for Mrs. Pence, and I'm going to speak for myself as the son of a grievously wounded combat soldier from Vietnam, and in Mrs. Pence's case, the mother of a Marine warrior. These are issues that we live with every day. And for the President of the United States to say it is about time that those who have carried the burden of freedom on their shoulders are put front and center in the national conscience, that is an enormous first step for this nation and long overdue.
Thank you.
I've thanked Mrs. Pence. I want to thank two other people. First is our Executive Director, Barbara Van Dalen, who took this burden on herself, but took it joyfully, and is not only opening the aperture when it comes to a discussion of this last tragic act in a veteran's life, but also opening the aperture on a discussion, finally having a discussion.
잠정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
So Barbara, I thank you.
잠정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
And last but not least, I want to thank our Deputy Secretary, Colonel Pamela Powers, who took this on when she was Chief of Staff and has carried it across the finish line. I thank you very much, ma'am. Mr. President, I'll go back to that history. In the 1890s, one of your predecessors, whose portrait hangs in the green room,
was alarmed at the reports he was receiving from the Frontier Army of countless deaths amongst officers and men
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
American West. He was the first president to begin taking a look at those sad numbers, and it has taken these 130 plus years for another president to finally say enough is enough. On any given day, 20 American warriors take their own lives. Those are active duty, guardsmen, reservists. The largest part of that number is from my father's generation in Vietnam. But another reason why this task force is so important is that it will point the way for the rest of the country. Growing up as a youngster at Fort Bragg, the leading cause of death amongst my classmates in junior high and high school was automobile accidents. Today, it is suicide. It is a scourge that is impacting every segment of this country.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
President, for having the vision to identify the real solution to this national problem, and that is us, each one of us. Each one of us can help.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
Prevented America from taking on the important issue of mental health.
정정 주문 접수 완료되었습니다.
The culture that made it acceptable to ignore the signs of mental health and distress. Each one of us can learn to identify the signs amongst our friends, our neighbors, and our coworkers. So this day is the beginning of one of the most important national discussions America has seen. It is an effort to find a solution to a problem that does not discriminate amongst its victims. The poor, the rich, people of all races and creeds. So I'm going to end with a story that I've told before, and it was one that I was very familiar with growing up at Fort Bragg. The looming presence in the home of the airborne was Matthew Ridgway. In fact, he was so powerful that even the minor league baseball team's mascot is named after him in Fayetteville. General Ridgway commanded the All-American Division to victory in North Africa and Sicily, and then General Eisenhower tasked him with leading the airborne assault on Hitler's fortress Europe on the night of D-Day. General Ridgway planned the operations for the All-Americans, the Screaming Eagles, and the Red Devils of the British 1st Airborne. But on the night of the invasion, he couldn't sleep. He fell out of his cot. And he reached for sustenance in the Old Testament, and he looked to the book of Joshua and God's promise to Joshua on the eve of the great battle of Jericho. And the Lord promised the general, I will not fail nor forsake thee. Mr. President, that is what you have sent to the American people today and to the 20 million Americans who are in uniform and who have left uniform, that we will not fail nor forsake the people of the United States who have always carried, without question, our freedom on their shoulders. So, Mr. President, I thank you very, very much.
Great job you're doing. So Karen Pence has stated beautifully just a little while ago that the two words anxiety and stress. And all I can say, Mike, is thank goodness we don't have any anxiety or stress in this job with these people back there.